This billionaire CEO of America's largest crypto exchange is now making waves for everything that he is saying about the future of Bitcoin when it comes to nation states and the current president-elect. But why should we listen to him? Why should we take word of what Brian Armstrong is saying when it comes to Bitcoin and the current Bitcoin space? Well, first, let's take a listen to what he has to say about the future of Bitcoin when it comes to nation states.
Clear at this point that Bitcoin is a better form of money than gold. It is provably scarce, just like gold, but it's more portable and divisible. So you can actually use it. Has higher utility, I would say, and it was the best performing asset of the last 10 years. And so for store of value, I think it's going to be important for governments to hold this over time. It might start with being 1% of their reserves, but I think over time it'll come to be equal to or greater than gold reserves.
So listen there, folks. Brian Armstrong is saying that he thinks it might be equal to or greater than gold reserves by nation states. That doesn't seem shocking to me, especially with everything that we've been seeing. But why should we listen to Brian Armstrong of Coinbase? He's been giving you every access to every crypto underneath the sun. But I think that we should start to listen to Brian Armstrong because of just the access that he has to the president and the access that he has to being a custodian for many of the major players in the space. But just how much gold is currently being held by these nation states? Well, instead of my friend good Luke Mikic and doing his quick maths, I had ChatGPT do it for you. So as of January 21st, so as of today, the price of gold is 2,700 about per ounce. We've got about 59 metric tons in strategic reserves all over the globe. So that looks to be about 5.17 billion US dollars being held by nation states currently. And that's just of gold. That doesn't include all their different reserves and every other asset that they have as well. But that's not even the half of what Brian Armstrong said. He even had another interview today talking about the U.S. Bitcoin Strategic Reserves sent the alumnus and what all they're saying and the fact that President Trump is, quote, looking forward to a strategic reserve. So don't take it from me. Let's listen to what Brian had to say here.
Met him before the election, met him after. How serious is he about a strategic Bitcoin reserve?
Well, I didn't talk to him about that specifically, but I think he is excited about it. I mean, he really wants to be the first Bitcoin president. Cynthia Lummis in the Senate is actually, I think, the one driving this legislation around a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I think it's a good idea. The U.S. actually has reserves in lots of things: gold, oil, I think like 27 different rare minerals like palladium and all these things. And so, I think the world is moving to a Bitcoin standard for money. They absolutely should hold. Any government who holds gold should also hold Bitcoin as.
So he did it again. Brian Armstrong doubled down on his opinion. Any country, quote, that has gold as a strategic reserve should also hold Bitcoin. But I think the interesting part is he said Donald Trump is very excited when it comes to the Bitcoin space. He wants to be the first Bitcoin president. He wants his name to be in the lights, folks. He wants everything to revolve around him. He wants to make history. And this strategic reserve bill would definitely be something that would make history. Now, that was just only part of the interview. Let's listen to the rest of this clip here from Brian Armstrong.
Sure, we could do a 2-hour podcast on the mechanics of a Bitcoin reserve. But for the average folks out there trading crypto, what does that look like? And is there a probability that you could place on this actually happening?
Well, I think for the average person in Bitcoin, I mean, if the U.S. gets a strategic Bitcoin reserve, probably the rest of the G20 will follow, or many of them. And that's just, that's going to drive the Bitcoin prices way up. So there's a lot of positive drivers of that. I think we have an opportunity to get regulatory clarity in this new administration. The Bitcoin ETFs are seeing, record adoption. They've kind of broken all the records for ETF inflow. We're seeing payments really start to take off with stablecoins. It grew 300% year over year. Did about $30 trillion of payment stablecoin volume last year. So it's pretty exciting. And I think that this is all like just positive news for Bitcoin adoption.
I remember I last talked to you, or I caught up with you at the Goldman conference in 2023, and you still saw Bitcoin prices going to a couple million. But I mean, fast forward today, I mean, there's a lot more I guess things are about to loosen up regulation-wise. You still, I mean, do you see higher prices in that?
Well, I think you say loosen up regulation-wise. We actually, well, it's a strange thing because we actually don't think there was much clarity out of the rules over the last 4 years, which was actually weaponized by the Biden administration and Gary Gensler to really attack the industry.
All right, folks. So enough of that. I would describe that whole interview in one word, folks: bullish. Because not only is he saying, "Hey, look at the world. If we have the U.S. build a big reserve, multiple countries in the G20 will then soon follow." And then after that, he talks about all these different countries and the regulatory clarity that the Trump administration will now have. And from that, now we have the potential to have businesses hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet, more nation states to now hold Bitcoin. And it seems like Brian Armstrong is now making waves because he is calling on countries to establish his Bitcoin strategic reserve. Now, I definitely think that this will continue to make a push. In a Jan 17 blog post from the Economic Freedom, Brian Armstrong said cryptocurrencies were, quote, the next chapter of capitalism, offering suggestions from policymakers to integrate digital assets into their economies in 2025. So not only is Brian Armstrong looking at all these things, but hey, all right, he's the CEO of Coinbase, but why is that very important going forward? Why should we really care about what Brian Armstrong has to say? And who is Brian Armstrong, right? I mean, Brian Armstrong's really made his name in the Bitcoin and crypto space. He's a multi-billionaire with his net worth sitting at $12.8 billion. But if you look at how drastic Coinbase and how much Coinbase's fingerprints are in the industry, Coinbase custodies 8 out of the 11 Bitcoin ETFs here in the United States, right? So if you look at the way that the Coinbase has an influence, it custodies massive amounts of ETFs. It custodies Bitcoins for businesses' balance sheets. It's not clear yet if it's custodied yet for nation states, but that seems to be the next logical step. Coinbase has gone through and made a deal with the US government, even landing a $32.5 million contract to be able to custody crypto and Bitcoin for the likes of different people, such as the Justice Department, providing custodies for them. So if the Justice Department seems it's secure to hold the seized Bitcoin for the likes of the DOJ and others, it seems only logical that, Brian Armstrong and Coinbase would be in talks with the government, whether it's state-led governments or the entire United States, to potentially have the Bitcoin strategic reserve and help hold that Bitcoin in that aspect. So it looks like, everything that Brian Armstrong is comparing here, he's looking at all of this, right? He said, I wouldn't doubt it if countries that hold gold start to hold Bitcoin. Now, let's look at all this, right? We've got a bunch of countries holding gold. The leader is the United States, holding 8,133 tons of gold as of September. And then it goes down the list. So he said, why would it not make sense for countries that are holding Bitcoin to start to hold gold? We've seen it's a store of value. We've seen where it's gone. And you see it rise from zero to the 7th largest asset in nearly 15 years of time. And so it's, of course, just about 9 times smaller than market cap of gold, but it's definitely trickling upwards and going in the right direction. So it seems like Brian Armstrong has some sort of general sense of what is going on in the Bitcoin industry. And it seems like this is the type of messaging that he is getting from other nation states around the globe when it comes to Bitcoin and a potential of a Bitcoin strategic reserve. He seems to have his fingers in everything when it comes to holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet, whether it's something along those lines. And, it seems like he's been advocating for the Bitcoin strategic reserve and potentially talking with the likes of Cynthia Lummis and others. And what does that mean? It means that Coinbase would be the potential custodian for the United States. Would there be integrated with that, right? So Brian Armstrong has advocated for this strategic reserve. They've had pro-crypto legislation ahead of Trump's second inauguration. And so they've even come out and backed the idea of a Bitcoin strategic reserve, emphasizing its role in the next global economic race. And that was highlighted in Brian Armstrong when he was saying in that interview that I showed you guys a little bit earlier that, if the United States were to then get a Bitcoin strategic reserve, that multiple G20 countries would then follow. So it would start the snowball effect where the United States jumps and everybody says, how high? So how much Bitcoin should they necessarily buy? So I think the betting markets indicate a significant probability of Trump's administration considering the reserve by 2026. And I think that this should be a huge takeaway from everything going forward. Now, even Brian Armstrong, even though he's been into the crypto markets and dabbling in that, I think he has really looked at Bitcoin as the golden goose, as the true store of value. In fact, in a previous interview, he even said the way to ensure the survival of America is to ensure that the currency is strong and we continue this American experiment. I actually think Bitcoin and crypto is really essential to that. So it just highlights how important Brian Armstrong, as an American, is saying, hey, US, if you want to keep dollar dominance, you need to implement some sort of Bitcoin policy, some sort of Bitcoin strategic reserve policy that Cynthia Lummis has come along and essentially said, right? So this businessman, now a billionaire, an investor who created Coinbase, is now, worth just $12.8 billion. And he's profited a lot off of, this industry rapidly growing. So obviously he would see a big benefit if this strategic reserve would be passed. But it seems like, Donald Trump and others were creating the meme coin and everything else. The influence that they have on this potential market is astronomical. It essentially almost cannot be really described as to, what the potential impacts of this could be. So I think it's very important that we really pay attention to what Brian Armstrong is saying, just because of the overall influence he has in the market. Because, Brian Armstrong has been in the market for a long time. I get it, Gio. He is a shitcoin casino. But what I'm trying to highlight here is that he's also a custodian for many major players, right? He was a custodian for 8 of the 11 Bitcoin ETFs, which makes it a little bit centralized, right? So, with Brian Armstrong and Coinbase's, essentially influence and fingerprints in this, is that we essentially have to listen to what he's saying, because he's the one that's talking to a lot of these people, right? Say what you want about David Bailey and Bitcoin Magazine and what all he has, done with that, accepting, sponsorship dollars from the likes of, other companies. But, David Bailey, Brian Armstrong, these are 2 people that are major players in this space. They have access to President Trump. They've spoken to President Trump. And because they have spoken to him, they've been in his ear, essentially telling him what, they think is the best way, the best course of action. Trump is essentially starting to trust these guys. And especially if Coinbase has a custody of 8 out of the 11 ETFs. And Coinbase has also garnered this giant contract with the United States to hold its seized Bitcoin. I think that Coinbase could be a potential player to hold and custody the Bitcoin for the potential Bitcoin strategic reserve here. So that is the point I'm really trying to get across, is that, even though Brian Armstrong is a shitcoiner, right? I mean, a big part of their business is profiting off that spread, right? And they encourage you to buy every crypto under the sun. I don't think that is the way to go. I think we should be Bitcoin and Bitcoin only. And I don't think you should trust Coinbase either. I think there's a potential there for, something to catastrophically happen just because of the amount of counterparty risk and their business model. But Brian Armstrong has been kind of vouching for the long-term value and potential of Bitcoin for a while, right? He's been making the case for Bitcoin strategic reserves here going forward. And I think that is something that, can't be taken lightly, because he has, talked to governments around the world, exploring the possibility, including Bitcoin in their strategic reserve. He noted that it's been the top performing asset in the past 12 years and makes it a compelling option for countries to seek to diversify their reserves, right? So, there's 59 metric tons of current gold reserves. He said that every country that has a gold reserve should have some sort of Bitcoin reserve plan. And, that equals about 5.1, nearly $5.2 billion in just gold, right? And countries have strategic reserve in all other aspects, right? So, as Gio in the chat is saying, not your keys, not your coin isn't some catchy phrase. It's the entire point. And Saylor's working overtime to make sure those keys end up in institutional custody. That's a fair point. I would even argue that Michael Saylor, although, he's a huge Bitcoin bull, I pretty much doubt that Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy are holding their own keys. Maybe Michael Saylor does, but I don't really feel that MicroStrategy is in the position to do that. They're a publicly traded company. It is something where they probably have some sort of, issue, and they have Fidelity or Coinbase or the others holding that. My man Austin in the chat with 10, I believe that's 10 euros. Man, thank you so much for the super chat. Maybe I will go and get myself a little beard trim or a haircut here. Clean up the eyebrows a little bit with that, man. I really appreciate it. And I'll give, a big shout out to Austin. So thank you guys so much for the super chat and everything going forward. But, as Gio is saying here, when Saylor calls self-custody advocates crypto antichrist, he's not just throwing shade. Satoshi created Bitcoin to free us from the very institutions Saylor is inviting to the party. And, I couldn't agree more with you here. And that's why I've partnered with Bitcoin Well, because I think Bitcoin Well is the best place for you to buy Bitcoin, and it's non-custodial. So not your keys, not your coins, exactly as my man Gio is saying in the chat. Don't trust your Bitcoin with any of these guys. All these other players, they hold it for you. You can buy through Bitcoin Well, and they'll send it directly to your cold storage. You can go to bitcoinwell.com/green candle, join the party. They've got great OTC desk as well. So if you're trying to buy over 50K purchases, they can help you do that in the most secure way possible. Send it to your cold storage, help you get it all set up, and give you that great white glove service. So I think that this is the future. I think it's inevitable that everybody's going to hold Bitcoin in cold storage. And I personally put the green candle stamp of approval behind Bitcoin Well, because I think that's the best way to do it. So although a lot of this video has been about Coinbase and the impact that, Brian Armstrong potentially has, right? I just want to highlight that a lot of these custodians, right, when it comes to Coinbase and others, they're working with the government. They're working on ways to try to secure and hold Bitcoin for large institutional players. So it's not necessarily for you, right? You can hold Bitcoin, your own private keys, the true power of it. You can take control of your wealth and your financial future. And I think that is the greatest freedom technology that there possibly is, right? There's, as Gio is saying, maybe Saylor isn't the villain of this story. He's just the first one to figure out how this story always ends. And, I potentially agree with that, right? I mean, you got to always watch what they do, not what they say. I'm like I said, I'm fairly certain Saylor isn't holding his keys here. I think that it is something that we got to look out for. But folks, with all that being said, I do have some very bullish news for you. I just dropped one of my most bullish episodes, I think, ever on the podcast with Jeff Booth. I got to sit down with him down here in Medellin, and I highly encourage you guys to go check that out. You can go to the channel and go check out one of the bullish, if not the most bullish guys in Bitcoin, Jeff Booth. He's always great. So I'll cut it off here and you guys go check that out. But before you do that, smash the like button here, smash the subscribe button, tell a friend to tell a friend, and go check out that interview from Jeff Booth, because it'll get you jacked up on the future. And thank you guys all for joining me. And thanks the chat for being absolutely outstanding and active here today.